In 2014, in a suburb of Dublin, a brief romance between Sonia Blunt and Eric Locke went sour, setting off a chain of events that would end with Sonia's violent death.
This was a brutal, awful murder. It was rage-fueled.
Furious at being rejected, Locke became obsessed with getting Sonia back.
And he was going to do that by hook or by crook, whether Sonia wanted it or not.
He brought cable ties, the Stanley knife, duct tape, the imitation gun.
After taking Sonia's life, Eric Locke threw off all responsibility for his terrible crime.
The defence really argued for his mental disorder.
It was a momentary insanity. I never meant to do it.
Despite his attempts to play the victim, Eric Locke's depraved actions mean that he will forever be known as one of the world's most evil killers. In May 2017, Eric Locke was jailed for the murder of his colleague Sonia Blunt. The 35-year-old had lured Sonia to a hotel room in Dublin and ended her life after pretending to be someone else online. Locke was a lonely heart's worst nightmare.
The person that you're meeting may not be the person that they say that they are, but it could be somebody deceiving you, and then you could end up in a situation where you're murdered or killed. I think that's what's scary about it.
31-year-old Sonia thought she'd done enough to keep herself safe, but she'd not reckoned on the determination and evil intent of Eric Locke.
He has been online. He has changed his identity, a new profile on social media.
He pretended to be somebody else so that he could have access to her. He had no intention of leaving there that night without having her. That was the plan.
Sonia Blunt was a single mother simply looking for love. Killer Eric Locke deceived and manipulated her in pursuit of revenge and retribution. This killer's story begins in the spring of 1982, 6 miles west of Dublin city centre.
Eric Locke was from St John's Park East in Clondalkin, in County Dublin.
Quite a small community, and he was born to a very good family.
Locke grew up with his parents and sister in the working-class town. It was an ordinary childhood, though Locke's mother and father had concerns from time to time about their son's state of mind.
He had been hyperactive as a child, and his parents had sought treatment for him. He was noticed by his family at a young age to be interested in lining up things and making lists, and they were concerned about him, but he was never diagnosed with anything.
And he also said that he was subject of ridicule because of a deformity on his penis.
When Eric Locke was born, his urethra was on the underside of his penis, and there was a surgical attempt to correct it, but it was unsuccessful. So then he was left with both the deformity itself and the scarring. And he didn't know about this really until he was teased in the showers after a PE class when he was 12 or 13 years of age. And after that, he always felt different.
Whether because of his issues in his teenage years or for some other reason, those who knew Eric Locke in his 20s noticed something a little unusual about the way he interacted with the opposite sex.
I think one person said of Eric Locke that he was weird about women.
He had no problem getting girls. He was quite a good-looking man objectively, but he never could hold on to them, and nobody ever knew much about his relationships.
One friend described him as charming, but dead behind the eyes.
Eric Locke was definitely an odd person, but he didn't seem to be a dangerous person. He had no history of violence or any police history at all.
After graduating from college, Locke entered the world of work and enjoyed socialising with friends and colleagues.
He was a football player as a young man, a Manchester United supporter. Some people say he did a bit of male modelling. Whether it's true, I'm not sure. But certainly he was, upright and throughout his 20s, didn't really make much of an impression on anyone. He just had an ordinary life.
In 2013, 31-year-old Eric Locke was single and living with his parents in Clondalkin when he got a new job at a glue manufacturer 4 miles away in Talla. This is where he met the woman who would soon become the focus of the dark side he'd so far managed to keep under wraps.
Locke worked with a number of people in the daily course of his employment, and one such person he worked with was Sonia Blunt. She was a 31-year-old lady from the Talla area.
They caught each other's eye at work, and there were rumours around work that they fancied each other, and they did go on a few dates.
31-year-old Sonia had worked at the manufacturing plant for about 10 years when she met new employee Locke.
Sonia was brought up in Talla, at southwest of Dublin centre. One of 5. It's a close family. The parents separated, but it was still amicable.
The eldest of 5 children, Sonia was known as a caring sister and daughter with a strong circle of friends. She'd studied childcare at college before starting her career at the manufacturing plant. Sonia was also a devoted single mother with a toddler son from an unhappy long-term relationship that had broken down in the autumn of 2013.
He was domineering, and she had gotten away from that relationship.
The man had left the country, and she really was beginning to enjoy life again at that stage because she wasn't looking for a serious relationship.
In December 2013, Sonia Blunt and Eric Locke started spending time together outside of work. The romance, however, was short and not particularly sweet.
I think Locke was to say later we were never boyfriend, girlfriend. It was just a sort of, they went on a number of dates. Early in January 2014, Sonia and Eric Locke go on a date together. It's a gig. So far, so normal.
At some point in the night, Sonia decided to go out and have a cigarette. Ultimately, Locke was a bit suspicious. She was gone for 20 minutes, and this seemed to upset him.
After a while, Locke came out looking for her, and she was talking to other people, including males, and he called her a slut.
Furious, Locke berated Sonia for daring to chat with other men.
Basically accusing her of flirting, very gendered slurs. So that incident actually is probably the biggest red flag you can have from anyone who's going to become a problem for you in the relationship. And she didn't like it, and she was upset by it.
Horrified at the dark turn the date had taken, Sonia left, telling Locke that the romance was over. As he took a taxi home a few hours later, a drunk and apparently remorseful Locke tried to take back his verbal attack.
He was just hounding her by text message and just begging her to let him see her and explain it, and she said there's no need to explain it.
Sonia explained to him in the messages that she knew he was a nice person, however, she couldn't accept being spoken to in that manner.
Over the next couple of days, Eric Locke bombarded Sonia Blunt with dozens of messages demanding a second chance. Sonia asked him repeatedly to stop, but the texts kept coming, peppering her with excuses for his jealousy and aggression.
He did acknowledge that the only reason that he reacted in this way was because he was insecure and that Sonia hadn't told him that he was attractive. This was surprising to Sonia, that he would react in this way or seek this type of approval.
Sonia had only had a couple of dates with him. This kind of behaviour after a relationship breakup is not about love. It's actually about possession, an inability to take any kind of rejection at all. And it can become really quite dangerous quite quickly.
Sonia found Eric Locke's response surprising, even alarming, but it was only the beginning. On the 13th of January, 3 days after their disastrous date, he walked out in the middle of his shift. He stopped answering his phone or replying to co-workers' messages about his whereabouts.
Sonia, being the caring and kind and considerate person that she was, sent him a text to say, "Oh, we're worried about you, is everything okay? But he didn't respond until the following day.
And he said that he was in a hotel room and that he had a rope and that he was sorry. It was at this time that Sonia decided to contact the Gardaí.
Sonia was worried sick. She had no idea what this desperate, volatile man might be capable of doing.
The Gardaí were able to trace Locke's phone to a hotel room, and when they got there, he said that it was just a joke. However, the Gardaí didn't believe him and weren't convinced, so they arrested him under the Mental Health Act. He was then hospitalised.
He discharged himself later that day, and she stayed in touch with him. Her text messages to him were more of a caring nature after that, asking him to get help, encouraging him to get help. She was extremely worried, and her friend said she wasn't sleeping or eating.
Sonia felt terrible about the way things had turned out, which is perhaps exactly what Eric Locke intended.
Sonia was such a gentle and kind soul that she was looking after his best interests, and he exploited that instead of appreciating it for what it was.
He is looking for anything that will get her back. It's like having a little toolbox, right? Well, I'm going to pull this tool out, the begging and crying. Let's see if that works. And if that doesn't work, then we'll go to something else.
For homicide expert Professor Jane Monckton-Smith, Eric Locke's threats to take his own life were not just a tactic. They were also a warning sign of the risk he posed to Sonia Blunt's life.
When I'm training police, we always say, if there's a threat to suicide, that should be interpreted as a threat to homicide.
Eric Locke's desperate text messages and disappearing tricks were just the beginning. His pursuit of Sonia Blunt would continue to escalate. But while Locke was planning his next move, Sonia had been online and met someone new.
Sonia was contacted on social media by a guy called Shane Cully, and they started messaging.
And he seemed completely different from Eric Locke, and there was a bit of fun, a bit of banter back and forth, and she just went with it.
Sonia wants to find something. Maybe it's friendship, maybe it's romance. One can't be absolutely sure, but I can be incredibly sympathetic because I can understand exactly how she must have felt.
They're getting along quite well. He's proposing to go on a date. Initially, Sonia had some concerns. She was worried that this could have been Locke, essentially catfishing her. So she asked Shane Cully to send her a selfie. She wanted to be completely assured that this wasn't Locke pretending to be somebody else.
The young mother ignored her own misgivings and brushed off the fears of those who'd witnessed her ordeal with Locke.
And even when she was telling the story to her co-worker about this guy she was going to meet, the co-worker said, "Are you sure that's not Eric Locke pretending to be someone else?" That's the kind of guy he was, that they suspected that of him. And she assured her, "Well, I thought that, but I actually got a selfie from him. It's not him." And they started to send each other risque messages, and eventually they agreed to meet up in a hotel room.
It was something unusual for her, but it was after Valentine's Day, perhaps feeling slightly lonely, and decided to spend the night with him.
Sonia Blunt had never before arranged a romantic encounter with a stranger in a hotel, but she pushed her nerves aside and set a date to meet Shane Cully. While Sonia did her best to move on, Eric Locke was persisting in his campaign of emotional blackmail.
He accused her of blanking him at work and said that she was spreading rumours that he was stalking her. And she replied, "Well, I haven't heard those rumours, but I would appreciate if you'd stop staring at me at work because it is making me feel uncomfortable."
Sonia had been through bad breakup before. She had seen probably the kind of behaviours that Locke was displaying, you know, that possessiveness, that control.
It must have been very difficult for Sonia on a day-to-day basis, coming in and wondering, how am I going to deal with him today? What form is he going to be in today? I have to thread the needle, be nice to him, but not give him the wrong signals.
Sonia was so uncomfortable with Locke's behaviour that she considered asking to change shifts so that she would no longer cross paths with him. Her former love interest seemed hell-bent on pressuring her into submission.
Sonia confided in one of her friends. She said that he was freaking her out. It was at this time that Sonia decided it was time to cut all contact with him and blocked him on social media.
She wanted him to go away. She was probably quite frightened of him at this point. The trouble is, when you do something like that, it just makes them more angry.
The mother of one desperately hoped this would put an end to a situation that had rapidly escalated from awkward to troubling to downright scary. But Sonia couldn't have been more wrong.
On the 24th of January, Locke writes Sonia a letter, quite long, again pleading for a reconciliation.
He was telling her how sorry he was and how ashamed he was of putting her in that position after sending the suicide text. But lower down in the letter, he would say things like, "I thought you might have stood by me when I was suicidal, and I would have stood by you, and I would have waited for you until you got over this."
One minute he was building her up, next minute he was knocking her down.
Locke ended the long letter by saying that Sonia was an amazing mother who'd everything going for her, and that he hoped they would all find happiness.
Locke's behaviour was escalating, and in this stage, Locke's behaviour turned to stalking.
He contacted his sister to say he'd got back with Sonia, but that he had heard rumours that she was ripping him off, and asked if an acquaintance of his sister could hack into her Facebook page. Then he asked, what about hacking into her Hotmail email account?
Whether or not she believed his tale that he and Sonia were back together, Eric Locke's sister refused to help him access Sonia's private email or social media profiles. Oblivious to Locke's attempt to stalk her, Sonia continued living her life. On Saturday, the 15th of February 2014, she and her family celebrated Sonia's little boy's birthday.
Sonia adored her son and loved being a mother. And according to her sister, she went all out for his birthday and had a party with family and his friends.
The festivities over, Sonia got ready for a secret tryst.
She had asked her mother to look after her son for the night because she wanted to go meet her friend Susan and was going to go out with her that evening.
She cancelled last minute, telling that friend she wanted to stay in and read a book, that she was tired.
Though she did not admit it to friends and family, Sonia had in fact arranged to meet her Facebook date, Shane Cully, at a hotel in Tallaght that evening.
She gets to the Plaza Hotel about 9 o'clock that evening, and it takes about 20 minutes for her to check in.
She's received messages from Shane to say that he was going to be slightly later, and could she leave the key card for the door at the reception? Sonia was thinking, sure, I'll wait and we can go up together.
But he didn't come for hours, and he was texting her through Facebook, and most of the text messages, about 12 of the text messages, were asking her to leave a key card for him at reception. And she said, sure, there's no need, I'll let you in when you get here.
Unaccustomed to arranging sexual liaisons in hotels and embarrassed about facing reception staff again, Sonia initially resisted Shane's demand.
However, Shane was quite persistent and asked her to leave the key down on the hotel desk, so she did so.
She'd been waiting for him for about 3 hours at that stage, and she said she was going to have a drink to calm her nerves. She would have been tired, but I suppose excited when he said he was finally on the way.
Armed with his own room key, Sonia's would-be lover had no need to knock.
When the door opens just before midnight, she immediately recognises that the man who's just entered the room isn't Shane Cully, but it's actually Eric Locke.
We will never know exactly what went through Sonia Blunt's head when she realised Eric Locke had tricked her into meeting him, nor will we ever be sure precisely what happened next.
Locke himself told Gardaí that she was shocked to see him and that she asked could they leave together. So she did not want to stay there with him. There was no doubt about it.
But Locke did not agree to leave with Sonia. He later said he feared she'd scream as they walked through reception. Almost 6 hours later, he left the hotel alone.
He left the do not disturb sign on the door. He didn't want Sonia to be found. He wanted to buy himself some time.
He got into the elevator. He could be seen trying to cover his face. He was wiping it with a tissue.
Eric Locke flagged down a taxi to take him home to Clondalkin, telling the driver who commented on injuries to his left cheek that he'd had an eventful night out.
Gave him some story about dancing with a girl on the dance floor and her boyfriend coming up and giving him a few slaps. When the taxi driver said, well, let's have a look at your face, it was very obvious, and he said, oh, you'll have a lot of explaining to do about that.
While Eric Locke slept off his rough night, Sonia Blunt's family had begun to sense something was amiss.
Sonia always called up to check her son was all right if she'd stayed out at night. First thing in the morning, she'd ring and say, is he okay?
However, when she didn't call, alarm bells started to ring. Her mother initially called her friend Susan to see what had happened because she was out with her friend Susan that night. And when Susan told her that she had changed her plans and said she was staying in that night, her mother was very concerned.
So her family were looking for her and calling everybody, calling her friends.
And it's then that her brother had seen on social media that a murder had occurred in Tala.
News travels fast that a body has been discovered. Now, and it's almost impossible to imagine what the parents must have felt.
The news of a suspicious death at a Tala hotel came in the late afternoon of that Sunday, the 16th of February. Fearing the worst but hoping they were wrong, Sonia's family needed to find out if she had come to harm.
They made their way to the hotel and saw her car there.
Her father saw Sonia's car and saw police gathered around, and he said that he just knew. When they approached the Gardaí told the family, you better come inside.
The guards asked the family to describe Sonia to them. And in particular, they asked them about the tattoo that Sonia had, because it's very specific. Well, imagine the scene. It is beyond description. What they must have felt and how they must have felt it.
Sonia Blunt's devastated parents and siblings were told they would have to wait 24 hours for confirmation that the female victim was indeed their daughter and sister. As the shell-shocked family returned home, inside the hotel, the Garda were examining what was clearly the scene of a terrible crime.
Her body wasn't discovered until cleaning staff went into the room at 3 o'clock that afternoon.
The young mother was lying on the floor in the recovery position. Sonia had blood on her face and some kind of fabric stuffed into her mouth.
They found her with a ligature mark around her neck. It was very pronounced.
They also saw an imitation gun. They saw duct tape and cable ties. When they went into the bathroom, they saw a bloodied towel and bloodied napkins. They also saw her bloodied phone cable charger.
Something horrible has happened in that hotel room.
The post-mortem results showed that Sonia died due to asphyxiation and lack of oxygen due to compression of the neck. The strangulation was so vicious and prolonged that it actually broke a number of bones in her neck.
Sonia's T-shirt had been pushed deep into her mouth, exacerbating the effects of the strangulation.
The state pathologist Marie Cassidy noted that due to the bruising around her mouth, that she was undoubtedly alive when her top was put into her mouth, and it was put in with such force and such ferocity that he broke several of her teeth and the wire retainer at the back of her teeth.
Sonia Blunt had been murdered in an act of extreme violence. Detectives asked themselves who could possibly want a hard-working, family-orientated young mother dead. But they did not have to wonder for long. 6 hours after her body was discovered, Eric Locke walked into a Garda station in the centre of Dublin.
At around 9:30 last night, a man presented himself to Gardaí at Store Street station in the city. he was arrested and taken to Tallaght Garda station.
Eric Locke went into Store Street Garda station and confessed to killing Sonia Blunt.
He said he had attempted suicide but couldn't do it when he had very real images of his family in his head. He admitted the killing but said it was an accident. He said that he had just planned to talk to her and explain his situation.
Locke told investigating officers he had to use the fake profile to trick Sonia into meeting him because she'd cut all contact and blocked him online. He insisted he'd only bought the cable ties and duct tape so that if Sonia refused to hear him out, he could tie her to a chair and force her to listen. The weapons were simply to scare her into compliance. Locke claimed that, at first, Sonia had been happy to stay in the room with him.
He said they had consensual sex. He was asked by the Gardaí if he had raped her, and he denied that. When she saw what he had brought with him, the pellet gun, the Stanley knife, the masking tape, she started to scream, and he said he just wanted to shut her up in case somebody heard her, and he started to strangle her.
Detectives found Locke's version of events hard to believe. The killer claims Sonia had willingly stayed in the room with her own stalker, had consented to have sex with him, and had only panicked when she saw the array of sinister items Locke had brought with him.
From a Garda investigation point of view, here we have a young woman who's strangled, murdered. And we have a guy then coming in and telling us that he did it, but he didn't intend to do it. So is it manslaughter or is it murder? Can we prove the intent or can we not prove the intent?
He first told the Gardaí that he strangled her with his bare hands only, but then he was shown the cable of her phone charger, which was bloodstained, and he admitted that he had used that briefly. He later said he used that first, and then he changed to using his hands.
That first attempt he made to strangle her didn't work, so he strangled her with his bare hands then instead. So really, his story didn't really stand up.
He was medically examined after his arrest, and he had very obvious scratch marks on his face, and he also had carpet burns on his arms and legs, and these were found to be consistent with him having carried out a sexual assault. His DNA was found on her forehead, her right breast, on a pillow and bed sheets in the room as well. Sonia's blood was found on the jeans Eric Locke had been wearing.
Locke told the Garda he wasn't sure if Sonia was dead when he left, but that before leaving, he dressed the lifeless woman so that she'd have dignity when she was found.
It's a very, very creepy thing to do.
The confession is not about remorse or shame or guilt. He's now trying to say to the police, I'm not really this bad guy that I look like. He is going to start presenting himself as the victim. He claimed that he'd always suffered with depression through his life, but when he met Sonia, it seemed to lift and he was happy. And then when she finished with him, it all came crashing down again. Depression does not cause people to commit this type of murder.
Just after 1 a.m. on the 17th of February, Eric Locke was charged with Sonia Blunt's murder.
Eric Locke was brought by detectives from Tallaght Garda station to the local district court this morning to face a charge of murder.
There was not enough evidence to charge him with raping or sexually assaulting Sonia. Locke was remanded in custody at Cloverhill Prison in Clondalkin, South Dublin. The task for detectives now was to prove their suspect intended to kill Sonia.
The police search Eric Locke's house and discover a positive treasure trove of information, including handcuffs, cable ties, a screwdriver set.
And also a list of names of women. A number of them had addresses which he obtained from social media.
When Locke's devices were analysed, Gardaí found he'd been stalking several women online. They suspected he planned more attacks like the one he'd inflicted upon Sonia.
We'll never know what his other plans were and who else he had taken a dislike to or a set against.
He had a kill list. He went with weapons. He had got there through coercive means. This guy had been planning this for a while. He was not an innocent. He was not a victim of his own temper. That's just not what was going on here. When a man kills a partner who has left him, it is never jealous rage. Most cases have planning, and Locke planned.
The fake Facebook profile in the name of Shane Cully had been carefully calculated to deceive Sonia and to win her trust.
He had photographs on there, he had friends on there. It looked like a real Facebook profile of someone. At this stage, it was months since he had met her and they'd dated, and he knew her likes and her dislikes, and he behaved completely differently to Eric Locke on this Facebook profile.
And he played on that to be able to get access to her. He knew enough about her to know if he came in as a potential boyfriend, what to say and how to say it.
When the pathologist examined Sonia's body, she found further evidence that Sonia's death had not occurred in one brief red mist moment, but had in fact been a prolonged and determined assault.
She was really attacked by him. She fought for her life, and she was able to scratch his face, and she actually got his DNA underneath her fingernails. She fought like a tiger, and it would have taken some strength and some determination and some time. Strangulation murder doesn't happen in a couple of seconds.
Though they were certain Eric Locke had murdered Sonia Blunt in cold blood, Garda and prosecutors knew it was down to them to prove it to a jury. On the 8th of May 2017, Eric Locke went on trial at Dublin Central Criminal Court. The process of getting justice for Sonia had been beset by legal delays.
The trial was supposed to start at least a year and a half earlier, but it was adjourned when the defence applied for a new psychiatric report for him.
Eric Locke didn't speak during the brief hearing. He stood in the dock with his head down. He was granted free legal aid, and the judge directed that he have access to his medication and be afforded medical attention if required, before remanding him in custody to appear again at Cloverhill District Court this day week.
Locke, now 35 years old, maintained his position that while he may have killed the mother of one, he was not a murderer.
When the trial did get underway, a jury was sworn in, and he pleaded not guilty to murder.
Journalist Natasha Reid attended every day of the 2-week trial.
The courtroom was packed, both families, friends, but also an awful lot of reporters. There was a lot of interest in the case. And there was an atmosphere, a very tense atmosphere, that prevailed for the whole trial.
One of the challenges for prosecutors would be convincing the jury of 8 men and 4 women that Locke was a callous killer who posed a threat to women.
One of the things that stood out about Eric Locke is that he looked like quite a decent person. He looked like someone who didn't belong in a courtroom, and sure enough, he'd never been in trouble with the Gardaí in his life before. He didn't come from that kind of background at all. So he did look out of place there, and he did look kind of innocent as well.
As Locke had already admitting to killing Sonia, it really came down to his mental state in this trial. So what the jury needed to establish was his mental state at the time of the offence.
You couldn't argue with the forensic evidence. You couldn't argue with the physical evidence. You could only argue about Locke's state of mind.
Locke's defence team claimed that at the time of Sonia's death, the killer was suffering from a mental disorder that meant he did not have the ability to form a rational judgment, exercise self-control, or understand that what he was doing was wrong.
The psychiatrist who evaluated Locke did say that a great deal of planning went into the murder of Sonia. However, he did go on to say that Locke's mental capacity had diminished a lot prior to this killing.
There are only specific mental disorders that can qualify a person for this partial defence of diminished responsibility, which reduces murder to manslaughter. So it did come down in the end to the defence psychiatrist saying he had a pervasive personality disorder, which would have qualified him for diminished responsibility.
When Dr. Bunn asked Locke to describe himself, he said he was a genuinely peaceful guy. However, the psychiatrist had noted in these examinations that Locke distinctly lacked empathy. He also added that he suffered from ADHD and borderline personality disorder.
When they cross-examined the expert witness, the prosecution questioned the idea that Locke had lost control of himself when he killed Sonia.
The doctor did concede that there was an element of control in Locke's actions when he was there. So when he was strangling her, he could change his hands. A person who lacks self-control is blinded by their rage and will continue acting in a consistent manner. However, Locke was able to change both of his hands. Not only that, he then made the decision to reach for the cable, the phone cable, and then strangle her with that.
Not only did Locke show control in the moment, the prosecution pointed out that he'd put a great deal of planning into his crime.
What he did was premeditated in that he had set up a fake profile. He had engineered a case whereby Sonia would leave the key card at the reception. He knew that if Sonia had gone along with her plan to let him in as he knocked at the door, that she would have recognised him through the keyhole and not let him in. He had brought the equipment to tie Sonia up and to gag her, and he had brought the fake firearm.
After killing Sonia, Locke had also gone to some lengths to cover his tracks. Having placed the "Do Not Disturb" sign on the hotel room door, he'd run from the building, attempting to cover his face so his wounds would not be seen.
He went outside and he was caught on camera disposing of his mobile phone.
The prosecution argued that Locke may have had a personality disorder, but he did not have a mental disorder that would qualify him for diminished responsibility.
The prosecution case was that it was anger and rage that led him to strangle her, and it was consistent with retribution and vengeance. And they said, that this story about consensual sex was not even slightly believable.
The prosecution argued that Locke was motivated by his obsessive fixation on the relationship with Sonia he wanted and believed he deserved to have.
Locke had honed in on Sonia. He had picked her out, and then he had decided they were going to live happily ever after, and he was going to dominate her. He was going to tell her what she can and what she can't do, and he was going to be in charge, and the relationship was going to go exactly along the lines that he wanted, and there was no room for manoeuvre.
He feels that she has committed to him in some way, which she hasn't, but he thinks she has. Then he feels, this is now an injustice. I've had my rights taken away by this person rejecting me and finishing with me when we were in a relationship and I was in charge of that relationship.
This was the argument put forward by the prosecution, that Eric Locke had killed Sonia Blunt because he was furious that she had rejected him. As the jury retired to deliberate on the 22nd of May 2017, Eric Locke must have been hoping they empathise with his plight as a lovelorn suitor.
He thinks that other people will sympathise with him, will go, oh, I know what you mean, mate. That must have been so hard for you. That's what he was expecting.
Eric Locke did not have to wait long to find out if he was right.
When the jury was called back after only about 90 minutes deliberating, they were asked, as is always the case, have you reached a verdict? There were gasps in the courtroom when they said they had actually reached a verdict at 90 minutes, and the verdict was unanimous and it was guilty. They didn't believe his story. They didn't believe that he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. They didn't believe he had no intent. They didn't believe there was any mental disorder there.
As he was leaving the courtroom, he turned to Sonia's family and apologised and said he was so sorry. This wasn't accepted by her family. They found that it was completely insincere.
As I think Sonia's sister Claire was to say later, if he'd been truly sorry, he wouldn't have put the family through the torture of a trial and the description of what happened to her sister. It's an act of savagery that it is impossible to exaggerate. She was an absolutely innocent mother of a 3-year-old boy. There can be no excuse, there can be no hiding from the fact that it was a dreadful, depraved act.
On the 2nd of June, Eric Locke appeared again at the Central Criminal Court for sentencing.
The mandatory sentence for murder in this jurisdiction is life, and that's exactly what he got.
2 of her sisters read out very moving victim impact statements, and they talked about not just losing a sister, an aunt, a daughter, but a mother, and the fact that Sonia's little boy had lost both parents because one had moved away, and Sonia, who had promised him she would never leave, had now left also.
In the aftermath of Locke's sentencing, Sonia's family expressed surprise at Sonia's actions that night. Their only explanation for it was that she had been terribly lonely.
I mean, she's had a relationship, had a child, the relationship has fallen down, and now she's simply looking for the next bit of happiness for her.
They believed it was completely out of character for Sonia to meet up with a stranger in a hotel room. It's just not something that she would have done.
Eric Locke exploited Sonia Blunt's vulnerability when he tricked her into meeting him. His only intention to punish her for refusing to continue their short-lived relationship.
He took advantage of her compassion. When he threatened to kill himself, she still was there looking out for him. Even though she was concerned about his behaviour towards her, she still wanted to be a really nice person and be kind and considerate. So it is scary and sad that somebody would take advantage of that to such an extent and to manipulate her with her kindness and to use that against her.
Eric Locke could not accept a woman rejecting him. When mother of one, Sonia Blunt, recognised his toxic behaviour and made the decision not to keep dating him, Locke responded with every trick in the book, from begging to threats to emotional blackmail. When none of his troubling tactics worked to win her back, he took the ultimate revenge, depriving a caring and beloved young woman of her life and cementing his place as one of the world's most evil killers.